Language is a really clumsy way of trying to describe music. It can be really beautiful, but it's really difficult. Just listening to the music itself seems to be the best kind of way to read the music. I identify with folk music culture insofar as I think growing up where I grew up, most of the people around me were very skeptical of cities and like mainstream sort of culture. There was a sense, like, you know, just living in a really small town in the country like that, of just like a really earthiness, and the life on the land was somehow a louder frequency than what was coming from New York or Philadelphia. And I think also a lot of mentors that I had and just adults growing up, our whole memories and sort of nervous systems and our bodies are so shaped by those early experiences we have as kids and adolescents. A lot of us spend a lot of time trying to escape whatever that was, but it's still a part of our DNA and our body memory. There's a big contrast between the kinds of cultural thinking that happen in Berlin and where I grew up, and I think there's that contrast is there just in me, just from how I was raised and then how my life has progressed since then. Not just like a country versus city, but American versus a cosmopolitan European, a German. I revere folk music culture. I think music has always been a seriously healing, joyful, communal place in human societies. I'm interested in holding up and honoring indigenous musical cultures. I'm interested in musics that were made before the Industrial Revolution and before capitalism. I'm interested in that long sort of eternal thread of the place that music has had for humans for a really long time. There are so many different kinds of musics, but I think you can pinpoint sort of celebrations or music as a form of storytelling or as a form of poetry or telling about a culture. So I think about like telling a lot. Music as like a conduit for communication, as a way of telling. And if you strip away capitalism, it's very obviously idealistic in a way because we all live in capitalism and this is something that we're all super aware of. But folk culture is about the heart of us as like organisms. Futurism is about, or let's say, we can sort of think about designing preferred futures together in terms of culture. So I think it's not only about aesthetics of technology or electronic music or having a sort of digital sound, as much as it is also about thinking about the place and the value of music in society, and thinking of that in a speculative way, which is to say, how could music function in society? We're all aware of certain problems that exist in terms of like musicians getting paid for work, musicians surviving, artists surviving in general. So for me, I think how exciting would it be to just think, okay, what if the whole system, we just like threw it out and thought, okay, what could this be? So it's like science fiction in a way. You could summarize posthumanism in a really simple way because a lot of indigenous and native cultures have been doing this forever, which is having a really deep connection with the land, with nature, and with all life, and sort of a reverence and an understanding that all forms of life can be producers of knowledge in our ecosystem, and in fact are. So from what I understand of posthumanism, it's about decentering humans as the main event of life, while focusing on all other forms of life and technology and nature, the earth itself, while also making space and building up and making equal life for humans who have been marginalized or deselected by the dominant culture, whether that's refugees, poor people, people of color, indigenous folks, differently abled folks. So it's like a sort of mass equalization, but also a focus on things that are larger than human society. And not thinking that we're the center of everything, like we're the center of the universe. We're not the center of the universe. The universe sees us just as equal as rocks, or I think it's more about like coming down to earth and really having a respect and a reverence for everything that is going on around us. And I think that's spiritual as well as sort of necessary to solve the kind of problems that we're all going forward into. Rosi Braidotti is the philosopher who I've read, who writes a lot about post-humanism. She's an Italian scholar. These ideas are related a bit as well to Donna Haraway and a lot of sort of feminist sci-fi writers. Haraway wrote this Cyborg Manifesto in the 70s, which was about women taking technology on as a way of upending the system. So a way of sort of hacking and integrating technology. Rosi Braidotti also writes about this idea that we're enmeshed with technology as much as with culture or with the earth. There's a lot of philosophers also, like people who study design, who talk about this too, that, you know, even if you go back to like making a coat or making a shoe, or like sort of Neolithic, much more ancient kinds of human culture, our feet change shape with the invention of a shoe. That's a very easy example to illustrate how technology is constantly impacting us in a way that we are inside technology at the same time as we are making it. So emojis, for instance, have totally changed how we communicate with each other in a really unprecedented way that we don't really reflect on a lot in daily life. I think in terms of music, design, post-humanism, thinking about cyborg, a lot of this theoretical stuff is experimental. It's not, you know, it's just to sort of light a fire. But when I think about these ideas in terms of composing or working, it's about having a real relationship with the laptop, having a real relationship with software, and treating tools, treating technology, treating software as a sort of living collaborator in the compositional process in one way or another. And that could lead to, you know, actual mistakes or glitches that might happen in software, that becoming part of the work, or simply letting the tools themselves sort of define some of the outcomes or the way that it sounds. But it's like a collaboration, it's like a relationship. So it's like being in symbiosis with the tools that you're working with, that you can give them space and agency, but that you're also injecting and sort of changing the rules and setting up a game and seeing what comes out of that. And in the end, you're responsible for the end product. So yeah, I like to sort of let the machine work a bit and also listen to what it's giving back to me and sort of then respond to that. I think also just in terms of recorded music, sound files, WAV files, MP3s, like the actual music material that we work with as electronic musicians, a lot of samples or files, they start to embody and take on a personality of their own. And this is something that, like, I think in the history of electronic music, a lot of people agreed with. Eliane Radic, who is musique concrète kind of composer in the 20th century, she wrote this essay, Time is of No Importance, which she was essentially saying, you know, the sounds that I make, the sounds that are recorded, they take their own time, and they take their own time to grow like plants. So she had this idea that, you know, things needed the time they needed to unravel to show themselves, the sounds, as material, but also as like sort of living things. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think in a similar way about this too, just in terms of also letting the sounds have their own agency and listening to them, not as though I'm the sole creator, but also that they're giving me information back. Sounds are giving personality back, and to respect that, I think it makes the production process a lot more interesting. I think there's definitely a ritual influence when I'm thinking about my music. I'd say when I think about recorded music, I think about how personal it is important for me when I'm listening on headphones or at home that I have a really intimate experience with music, whatever that is. When I think about like releasing a track or something, or that solo listening experience, it's quite different from the live context, which I also perceive as serving a slightly different purpose. Also, I'm there and my body's there and I'm singing. It's quite different. I think my interest in ritual goes back to spending so much time in church and doing church music, combined with the implicit ritualistic nature of raving, and that whole experience of being in a trance and losing yourself, dancing endlessly. There's something extremely spiritual and extremely mystical about both experiences, whether it's singing in a beautiful architecture or raving for 12 hours and really losing yourself in that communal experience and becoming so tired that your sense of identity somehow dissipates. Eris Drew talks about this really beautifully in terms of seeing electronic musicians, DJs, as ecstatic healers, and I quite relate to that. I think a lot of what I've been trying to do with my own music is really personal and just making music for myself, trying to heal myself, my own relationship with my body, and that can only be honest because I'm actually trying to do that. And so I think in some sense there's a ritual of healing that I like to take place in the live concert where I'm not primarily thinking about the selling of tickets or let's say, I'm not primarily thinking about the capitalistic nature of the concert or that everyone is there to see me. But I see myself in a concert more as like a leader of a ceremony. And so I also try to give myself permission to step away in my head from being like a pop performer or whatever, and think of myself as a conduit, someone who's channeling energy and channeling energy for a group and that I'm part of that group. Architecture is really important to that. Like I get really inspired by, I love when I get to play at super beautifully architectural spaces, big high ceilings, vaulted ceilings, church spaces, industrial warehouses, anything where there's a lot of space and room, combined with a good sound system, maybe combined with multiple channels. From my body, how I prepare the sound, into the microphone, into the laptop, into the audio interface, into the speakers, into the architecture, and through the sort of vibrations going through the bodies and into the ears of the audience. There's this whole ecosystem, and so much of that changes depending on the room, or the kinds of speakers, or the microphone. And so it's really like a delicate spiritual thing for me to set that up and have it set up right and have all the levels right. Because I think it can be an extremely healing, beautiful kind of thing that's possible in live music when we let it be. But it takes a lot of care, and it takes a lot of compassion and thought to sort of set that up. Yeah, the way that my concerts are going more now, I'm really starting to bring the kind of energy that I feel when I'm dancing, ecstatically raving, also onto the stage with me. And in one way or another, that communal energy is something that I can be spreading, even if it's just me on stage and all the sounds are derived from my voice.